Lestari girls are dancing their way around Australia, where they grew up, and will soon perform across Indonesia, where the troupe is deeply rooted. I recently spoke with two of the stars of the culturally packed show, Laura Reinwald and Mira Mullane, whose mother established an Indonesian dance academy here in Melbourne almost 30 years ago. I began by asking Ms Mullane how Indonesian dance found its footing in the Western world of Australia.
Yeah, sure. So my mum migrated to Australia in about, I think it was 1989. And at that time, she found it quite hard to integrate into society here. She thought there weren't a lot of Indonesians here, or that's what she thought. And so she started going to the consulate, the local Melbourne consulate, Indonesian consulate here in Melbourne. And she realised there was actually quite a big group of Indonesians in Melbourne. So the community was actually quite not big back then, but there was still quite a fair few Indonesians here. And so in Indonesia, she used to go to a dance and theatre school in, I think it was Bandung, so West Java. This was during her university studies. And since then, she's kind of had this this dream of starting her own dance group and promoting Indonesian culture, but abroad, so that, she can promote Indonesian culture. And, she realized there was actually quite a lot of general misconceptions about Indonesians, and a lot of her friends here didn't really understand a lot about the culture. And she thought this was a good way to kind of tap into her passion, but also, feel like she's making a difference here while she's, living here. And so it was a good way for her to not only meet other Indonesians and get them to join the group and, expand her social group, but also become more confident as well with her English. She found that she got a lot more confidence in speaking English and networking with Australians here, trying to sell her group or trying to promote her group as well, so that she could get a lot more bookings for incursions, festivals, different events in Melbourne. And she's noticed that in the amount of bookings she does get, it kind of correlates as well with what's happening in Indonesia at the moment, which is kind of quite sad, but at the same time it's quite interesting. So she's noticed that she's had a lot less bookings over time, depending on what's going on in Indonesia. So during the Bali bombings, during that time, she found that she had a lot less bookings, and she didn't have a lot of schools that were calling her back for a lot of these kind of events. And she noticed there's a lot of negative images coming out of Indonesia, and she just really wanted to kind of overcome that. So that kind of pushed her to continue doing this.
And about the dance group itself, how do you define the dance, what you do? I mean, it's traditional dance. Now, I'm going to ask you to explain traditional Indonesian dance within a Western Anglo concept.
Okay, I think it's actually quite hard to define. It's a bit of a vague term, traditional Indonesian dance, and when you try to describe it to my friends or Australian friends here, I find it very difficult because Indonesia is made up of more than 17,000 islands, and we cover dances from the east to the west. Like, every island is so distinct in their own culture, so it almost seems as though that there's a lot of different cultures within Indonesia itself. So when I say traditional dancing, the automatic response from my friends is definitely, so Balinese dancing. And it's like, it's not just Balinese dancing. We do tribal dances from Papua, from Ambon, from the east to the west, Sumatra as well. So depending on which island we perform from, it's a completely different dance, a different costume, different music, different instruments. So sometimes it's very surprising for people here, for performing at a multicultural festival. Everyone's like, where is this dance from? I'm like, this is actually from Indonesia. And they just don't believe it because it's something that they just don't see in the media. You're just not aware of it. And so that's what my mum loves as well, is just creating awareness, because there is just a lack of awareness here of what Indonesian culture is, because it is just so diverse.
Laura, your background is Irish, Catholic, English. So how did you tie up with Mira and the dance troupe?
So I met Mira when we were in Yogyakarta together on exchange in 2012, and I'd been learning Indonesian since I was in grade 5, and I've really enjoyed it, and always learning more and more. And we met up in Jogja when we were on the same exchange program, and she had mentioned that her mum runs a dance school in Melbourne and for traditional Indonesian dancing, and I just thought that was a really great way to, continue to be part of the Indonesian community in Melbourne and to continue learning about Indonesian language and culture, because there is so much that you can learn about Indonesia through dance. It's quite interesting how different dances do reflect the different cultural norms and practices that like occur in different islands, it is a really great way to understand Indonesia really well. And it is, it's also just something that is incredibly fun to do. I've met a lot of amazing people through it, and I've also had a lot of like incredible opportunities through like performing with this group of girls, and it's good.
What are some of your favourite moments of being on stage? I'll start with Laura and we'll get to you in a minute.
Some of my favourite moments.
Or embarrassing moments.
There have I do remember one time it was at a primary school, and I think we were still getting ready on the side of the stage, which was just like an asphalt centre, and the music just started. And I think this was for Tortor, the Sumatran dance that we did. I think all of us were kind of everywhere, and we all just like came from different points of the stage and just sort of worked our way into our formation. And it was interesting because we were a little bit behind in the music, and I think another girl who dances with us, Mira's sister Yana, she was kind of guiding us through the dance the whole time because, it was just moments like that. They're quite fun. It was very spontaneous, and it was great because we were all having fun up on stage, and we were all smiling, and the crowd still loved it, and we were able to engage with the audience as well, and it was good. But it was definitely like in those moments sometimes, like you look back and laugh, but it was a little bit stressful at the time. So, yeah.
Mira?
Yeah, as you can imagine with Indonesian dancing or performing in general, there's a lot of improvisation that's needed because things just don't work sometimes. And in terms of like the stress, I completely agree because there are so many occasions where the CD starts skipping or, the music doesn't work or it just stops. So there was one incident when we were performing for a festival at Melbourne Town Hall, and the music just stopped halfway, and it was just me and my sister dancing. And so, being the professionals we are, my sister just started singing halfway through the song, so just sung the rest of the dance because we know these dances like the back of our hand. We've done them so many times, so it gets to the point where we can actually dance each dance to any kind of song, or we can just sing along and we can just remember the movement. So my sister just sung for the rest of the 3 minutes, and she just sung us off the stage, and it just created like a authentic Indonesian feel, I guess, because she was singing Indonesian, so it was quite funny.
You were up on was it Australia's Got Talent, The Voice? Which program were you up on?
We were up on Australia's Got Talent, and we auditioned for this year's show, the 2016 one. And it was interesting, definitely like an experience. I think we all went in just kind of thinking like, we'd just, try out for fun. But we ended up getting past like that first initial audition into actually being able to perform.
Which is quite something, given that these programs tend to focus more on popular music, rock and roll, the kind of catchy stuff that gets in an audience, which is not necessarily what you do. I think you're a little more highbrow than that.
Yeah, it was definitely quite different. A lot of the acts before and after us were, I guess, your more traditional acts that you see on these type of shows, like just singing, or there was a pole dancer, and there was like some cowgirls performing, and I think there was like a robot man as well. So it was all quite strange. But yeah, it was really good. The judges' comments at the end, I think, were a little bit disappointing, to be honest, because they seemed a little bit hesitant to make a comment about what we were doing, and I think it just came from them being so worried about not wanting to say anything that might offend, like, religion or culture or something. And so unfortunately, it
sounds like Australian television in that they're competent if they're talking about Jimmy Barnes or Cole Chisel, but when it comes to a little bit outside their scope of thought, they get a little lost.
Yeah, they completely froze, and I think they just took okay, we need to be PC here, and just, so it was a little bit, I think, hard to sort of convey what we were doing, but as in to them. And it was a good experience overall. Even just like we met Dave Hughes backstage, and
sorry, who was Dave Hughes?
An Australian comedian. Yeah, Australian comedian who does radio in the mornings here in Australia.
What do you think, Miri? You have you're dinky die Australian, but you've got a foot in both camps. And given your background going back so far in your mother's history, how did you find? I guess it's a competition in popular culture, really. How did you find that whole ordeal?
I found it interesting as well, same as Laura. But again, I found it a bit disappointing because, I think for me as well, being kind of immersed in both cultures from a young age, I feel very close and connected to both. So it does make me a bit sad when the cultures aren't in harmony, if that makes sense. In terms of like the relationship between Indonesians and Australians, it obviously means a lot to me because it's important to me. And so just the lack of, I wouldn't say interest, but with the judges, I could see there was quite a lot of ignorance as well. And I can see that probably for the mass audience, it would be the same deal. And this is probably why we didn't progress as a group, because it didn't quite tick the boxes in terms of what would be entertainment or what would, really be part of the popular culture here.
But isn't that one of the problems in the sense that I've noticed over the last 10 or 15 years that more of these programs, it's not necessarily about culture, it is about ticking boxes, it's about a process. It's about impressing this person, that person, to moving up the food chain. It's about reality television if you want to get a record contract, which is not quite... It's not quite the way AC/DC started as whether they were a garage band or this kind of thing. But you are taking this a lot further, and I understand that there's a tour coming up of Indonesia. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So we were actually invited by the Ministry of Tourism in Indonesia. So they got in touch with my mum, and they found it interesting because they saw us online and they saw our videos on YouTube, and they found it fascinating that there are Australians out there who actually love it to dance and perform Indonesian dancing in Australia. So you see a lot of foreigners come to Indonesia, learn the dancing and perform over there, but there's not a lot of groups that you hear of where it's the majority of our group are actually Australians or half Australian and half Indonesian. So we're a very mixed group. It's not just Indonesians performing traditional Indonesian dance. And so I think that's also what the audiences here find quite interesting is when they come up to us and talk to us, they're quite surprised that we all have perfect English. We all have Australian accents. They're just like, oh, so how long have you been in Australia for? Like, do you speak English? And we're like, yes, we're actually locals here. We live here. We're all Australians. And I think it's just kind of looking past that and looking past the makeup and the costume. It's like we're actually Australians on the inside, if that makes sense. So yeah. So we've been invited to go over to Indonesia for, I think it's a week program where they've just, they're going to sponsor us to go over there, learn traditional dances in West Java, so I think around Bandung. So we'll be learning dances there for about a week, and then we'll perform at the end of the program.
Laura, you're looking forward to this trip?
Yeah, I guess definitely. There is another Australian girl coming, and Mira's sister Yana is coming, who's half Indonesian, and another girl, Daniela, who is a little bit younger than us, but she's also half Indonesian. And so, yeah, we are an interesting bunch when we get together, but it is really great. I think as well sometimes when we would stand out as being white and then coming into Indonesia and performing these performances, but it is a great way to, sort of develop those people-to-people relations at a grassroots level, and to just people are interested, so they come up and they talk to us and they say, hi, where are you from? And you start talking about what you do, and then, they become interested, and just any kind of initial barrier or thinking that they might have had would be broken.
Okay. Yeah. Where do you see this going in future? Because it has an organic growth, and it started with your mother almost the way you might start a rock and roll band in the early days, and then it becomes professional, it gets recognition, you're very well regarded. I've seen the performances and I think they're terrific. Where do you see this going in the years ahead? Because it's being a tradition, it's obviously not going to disappear. In fact, it's thriving.
I think that's definitely where it's heading, in the direction. That's definitely my mum's dream as well, which is also kind of the meaning behind the word Lestari. It means forever, to preserve forever. So that was her main goal, is just to preserve the culture and let it grow and just let people become more aware. And she's seen it, there's no better feeling compared to when you perform and you can see that the audience is actually really appreciating you're really entertaining them. It feels like you're almost getting through to them, and they like to talk to you after the dance and kind of ask you questions, like Laura said, and they just become really fascinated. It's just the dance is kind of just an opening for them to kind of an invitation for them to come and ask us questions and kind of want to know a bit more about Indonesian culture. So yeah, I think for my mum and for our group, that's definitely the direction we're hoping it to go to. We're just hoping for the group to grow, and it has grown over the years. What's interesting is, we've seen that the growth in terms of the members. It used to primarily be just Indonesian students studying in Melbourne who joined the group initially, because a lot of them felt homesick and they contacted my mum through the consulate, and so that's how they've all grown. They've all come together as a group and they've performed together as a group. But over the years, we've seen that a lot of the Indonesian students it's a bit less popular for them now. A lot of them have become a bit, for lack of a better word, westernized. They don't seem to want to be too into the culture and perform here. They'd rather just find other activities. But in terms of our group members now, I think the majority of them are either Australian or half Australian, or Australian students studying Indonesian. So I think that's quite interesting. So I think maybe the direction is more, our group is trying to kind of promote the culture to non-Indonesians, but a lot of non-Indonesians are also involved, if that makes sense.
Mira, now your background in Indonesia obviously goes way beyond your parents, but essentially it comes from Ambon, which is a very hard and difficult part of Indonesia, and it was absolutely clobbered by the Boxing Day 2004 tsunami. Have you been back there, and can you give us a little bit of direction in the sense of what it's like to come from Melbourne, which is notoriously safe compared with somewhere like Ambon?
Yep, sure. So I think also my going into Ambon, I think I was a little bit nervous, to be honest, because I actually am not quite close to my Ambonese side, because I haven't had the chance to go back there since I was a baby. So last year I did have the chance to go back there after about 14 years, and it was really interesting because I didn't know quite what to expect, and all I knew about Ambon is what I've heard from my parents and what I've seen on TV, which wasn't quite a good image of Ambon at the time. And unfortunately, a lot of my family actually passed away in Ambon, not just from the tsunami, but also because of the riots that were going on. There were quite a lot of sectarian riots in the village that my grandpa's from. So between the Muslims of the north and the Christians of the south, I think it was. So within those riots, a few of my family members were killed, and as well as my auntie, my mum's sister, sorry. And because of that, her son, we've actually adopted him. So last year we finally had the chance to go there. It was safe, and it was interesting because going back, it was just such a foreign place. So my grandpa's village is actually 2 boat rides from the main island of Palau. So it's 2 boat rides off the main island of Ambon. So you can imagine it's extremely remote. The villages, they all have their water. They take the water from the local well, which is actually a well that my dad actually built in 1990 or something like that. So it's a completely different environment, and I couldn't help but feel just a bit on edge and a bit unsafe, to be honest, because I didn't know what to expect, and everything I've heard about Ambon in the media, in the news, it just seemed like there was still a bit of tension there between the Muslims and the Christians of the village. And after the tsunami, there was still a lot of buildings like churches and mosques that weren't rebuilt. They just kind of left them there. So there's a bit of an eerie feeling. And being an Australian coming in there, I felt like quite foreign, even though I know that I'm kind of from there as well. Like my grandpa's from there, my family's there, but I just didn't quite feel like I really fit in. So
yeah, it's difficult, notorious. It's been through a lot, and in the whole concept of Indonesia as a sovereign country, it's still out there because a lot of the violence there was a lot of violence between the Christian and Muslims, but much of the violence by GAM is actually geared towards independence, and they see themselves as not being part of Indonesia. And if it wasn't for the tsunami, the insurgency would probably still be going. Now, Ambon, as with much of Indonesia, it's a long way away. How did you speak to them about the dance troupe? Did you think of performing there, or was it just a little bit too much?
To be honest, we didn't speak much about the dance group. They're aware of it, and I was quite surprised. I know it's a bit ignorant of me, but a lot of the people in the village did have Facebook, and they did see our photos and our dance group photos, and they were quite surprised, like, oh, there's a lot of, what do they call it, white people in your group. So they were quite like, they felt like this sense of pride, because as Ambonese, they didn't even perform or dance over there. But to see people like dancing, Ambonese dancing in Australia, where like, it just was quite reassuring for them and just really quite humbling, because to know that your dance and your culture is being represented like so far away on the other side of the globe in Australia is just, it's just crazy to even think that, because it is this dance that we do an Ambonese dance in Melbourne, and it's a dance that's from a very small village in Ambon, very remote. A lot of people don't even know about it. A lot of Indonesians don't know about it. So to see that being performed in Australia on a big stage, mass audiences, it's quite like, it's amazing for them. So yeah.
The power of social media. So speaking of which, Laura, how do you see the artistic flair, merit of the Lestari girls influencing on Australian culture, where the two come together? I mean, you're obviously part of that.
I think maybe perhaps it comes down to the fact that there is like a realisation in both Australia and Indonesia that we're both two very distinctly multicultural countries. So, and it's really great to see that like there is sort of like an understanding of the level of diversity from both sides, and that does, I guess, come from like a cultural aspect. So like, I think, well, for example, when we were like overseas in Indonesia, when we were there on exchange, a lot of people were quite surprised that Mira is Australian. Like they were like, oh, like I think it was your history teacher or something. And, you know, some people kind of questioned like, oh, you know, if you're Australian, you know, where are your blue eyes? Like, where's your, like, you know, you should have blonde hair. Like there was such like a sort of stereotype of what an Australian should be. But like there was just like a lack of understanding for the diversity of Indonesia. And it's the same like on an Australian side. Like when we were talking about before about how like everyone just assumes that the dancing is Balinese dancing, but in actual fact it's not. Like there's just so many different dances, and it's sort of coming like art and culture and theatre and dance, it's all just a great way to kind of bring that diversity to the forefront.
Taking this one step further, we mentioned before about the dance but on a wider stage, from as part of a broader kind of theatre performance in Indonesia. How do you see that working in a sense of the dance troupe here going forward, and how has that emerged from the past of in Indonesia? And as you're saying, it's a very different spread across the islands, and it varies a lot. But theatre and performance in Indonesia is quite strong right across the archipelago, and I find that most interesting, particularly where that can go. And with the advent of social media, as you just mentioned, in terms of Ambon, it's obviously a growth market.
Yeah, so in terms of the theatre, we haven't quite branched out that far into it, to be honest, because what we've found with Australian audiences is we sometimes have to tailor our dances to suit the Australian audience. So in terms of theatre, we did do one theatre show. It was based on a West Javanese myth, a legend called Dayang Sumbi. So we performed that. We did one performance of that, and we also did one in the Melbourne Arts Centre. What we found with that is it's a bit hard to, with Australian audiences to engage them for a very long time, because you can imagine if you're performing a theatre show with it like using language that is foreign, it's very hard to convey what the message is or like what the story is really about. And for Australian audiences who don't speak Indonesian or whatever dialect we are performing in, it's quite hard for them to kind of stay engaged. As much as it is very entertaining, it's kind of hard for them to kind of follow the story, and it's quite a detailed story. So what we found with these kind of theatre performances is we've had to tailor them. So for instance, my mum does a lot of wayang puppetry, which is just Indonesian puppetry performances. So she has her own screen, her own puppets, and she sometimes even she also conducts classes on how to make the wayang, and you know, kids can make the wayang, make their own puppets, and do their own shows. But with these wayang shows, sometimes they can go for maybe 12 hours traditionally. So they're the kind of shows that you just cannot perform here, because I don't think legally people are allowed to retain like an audience for that long to watch a show. So we've had to kind of obviously tailor it to the audience. And so my mum's made maybe 5-minute puppet shows. She's like created characters, like really funny characters. She'll make one wayang puppet. She'll name it Michael Jackson. She'll name another one like an Australian icon, and just like create a dialogue between the two so that Australian audiences can really be engaged and find it so funny. And like, even though it is traditional in a sense, but it's just tailored to the culture to make it funny, and you can engage them in a certain way. And it goes the same with a lot of our dances that are usually meant to be traditionally 15 minutes. We've cut it back down to 5 minutes because it just seems more logical. If you're trying to perform it for an Australian audience, sometimes you just cannot expect them to sit there for 15 minutes without really understanding the story behind it.
Yeah, part of the art of entertainment is to hold the attention of the audience, and if it's too much, it's too much, and you'll lose them. And it's an imprecise science, I think. But on that note, we're going to wind up shortly, and Laura, Indonesia in August. What are your plans for that and afterwards?
So in August we will be going, like we spoke about earlier, with on behalf of the Ministry of Tourism, we will be there with them, I think for about 5 to 9 days. It's been planned for something around like that. After that, I can kind of see myself always travelling back to Indonesia for the rest of my life. It's always an interesting experience, and I still sometimes can't get over how much I'm still learning. I've been studying Indonesian since I was in grade 5, and every time I go back, there's still just, so much more that I don't know. And sometimes I feel like the more I learn, the more I realise how much I don't know. And it does motivate you to continue to keep understanding, why things are the way they are. And dance is a really great medium for trying to understand Indonesian culture, understanding their viewpoint on the world. And yeah, it's really good.
And Mira?
Yeah, much the same. I think I travel to Indonesia at least once a year to see family, friends, but also to learn new dances. So when I'm there, I take the opportunity to go to a dance school, go to a local university and learn a dance while I'm there, because I figure I may as well learn from Indonesians while I'm there and bring it back here and perform here and teach the rest of the group as well. So I'm hoping to keep continuing to do that and hopefully stay quite involved in the group, as it is my mum's group. So it's more of a small family business, but we do it more for the passion, I think, more than anything, and more just trying to keep, continue the culture here in Australia.
And on that note, I'd like to thank Laura Reinwald and Mira Mullane. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.